Hey everyone, and welcome to a different kind of Learning Simply video. Today we're taking a detour from basic science principles and applying them to debunk the myths associated with the COVID-19 vaccine. Specifically, we're going to talk about the mRNA vaccines that have been developed by Moderna and Pfizer. As usual, we're going to be breaking down the science and explaining it as best as we can. The information you see is current as of January 8th, 2021. If you like this kind of video, please be sure to hit the thumbs up button and hit subscribe to our channel. If you think we should make a COVID debunked series or have other video ideas, please let us know in the comments. So, most of us have probably gotten at least one, if not several vaccines. It's important to remember that no vaccine is 100% safe or effective, but the benefits of the vaccine far exceed the risks of the disease or the risks of side effects. So before we begin, there's a little disclaimer that this isn't supposed to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. And always ask your healthcare provider if you have any specific medical questions. So let's talk a little bit first about emergency use authorization. So the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines have gotten emergency use authorization at this time. Emergency use authorization is not the same as FDA licensure, but it is used during a public health emergency if the following criteria are met. The product is to be used to treat life-threatening disease or conditions. Based on the scientific evidence available, it is reasonable to believe that the product may be effective. The known potential benefits of the product outweigh the known and potential risks of the product, and there is no adequate FDA approval alternative available. So pretty much right now the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are in phase 3, so they haven't been FDA reviewed and approved yet because we don't know the long-term side effects yet. Rare side effects and delayed reactions may not be seen yet. However, as the vaccine is distributed more widely, we will still want to keep track of these side effects. If someone has a severe allergic reaction after getting vaccinated, their vaccination provider will send a report to the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. So this is a national system that collects and reports from healthcare professionals, vaccine manufacturers, and the public about adverse events that happen after vaccination. Reports of adverse events that are unexpected, appear to happen more often than expected, or have unusual patterns are followed up with specific studies. And so that is what the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System is. So back to the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. The long-term effects of stage 3 clinical trials have not been complete yet, and we don't know anything about phase 4 yet. So this is why an emergency use authorization is needed for us to use this vaccine. However, I do want to reiterate that the current data is very promising in terms of both safety and efficacy, which we will talk about later when we talk about the Moderna versus the Pfizer vaccine. While we've spent the last year wondering when all this would be over, and quarantine seemed to be endless, now many of us are concerned that the vaccine was rushed. So how did it get here so quickly? Basically, it boils down to 3 reasons. Prior research. So COVID-19 is a novel coronavirus. Novel as in the first of its kind. However, there are other species of coronaviruses that we are familiar with. For example, SARS is another coronavirus that made its name on the news media a few years ago. Vaccines have been attempted against coronaviruses in the past, which laid much of the foundation for the new COVID-19 vaccine. Basically, we had a head start on making it because there have been coronaviruses in the past. Also, the genetic code was rapidly shared with scientists globally, so people from all over the world could work on it at the same time and collaborate on information. Another thing is the trial population. So vaccines against rare diseases are studied for many years before it can be determined if they are effective. Because COVID-19 was literally everywhere, researchers got the data quicker. There was also a huge interest to sign up for clinical trials, where other vaccine trials can spend months recruiting participants. Lastly, there was the funding. So there was an unprecedented amount of money that was spent on making the COVID-19 vaccine. Having the funding to start producing the vaccine before it had passed clinical trials was unheard of. Usually, companies don't start producing the vaccine until after it has been approved. Let's think about it this way. Who would want to spend money mass producing something that we didn't know if it would work out or not? Luckily, this gamble paid off big time as the vaccine is extremely effective. Now, let's talk a little bit about how the vaccine works. So, mRNA vaccines are relatively new, even though they have been studied for more than a decade. But, like we discussed before, there just wasn't a demand for them like there is now. So, to understand the vaccine, we have to first look at the structure of the virus itself. And right here you can see an animated structure of the virus, and obviously it's 3D. So on the outside of the virus there are spike proteins. You can see that labeled here. These spike proteins are common to the coronavirus family. And a fun little fact is they are actually how the virus was named, because these spikes look like the bottom of a crown under a microscope, and corona means crown in Latin. So the component of the vaccine that confers immunity is the mRNA. So mRNA is messenger RNA, which is used as an intermediate when creating proteins. So we have a full video on how mRNA is made, which I can link in the description. But long story short, DNA is like the directions on how to make proteins, and it only lives in the nucleus. So you can see DNA right there in the nucleus. And then to get these blueprints over to the protein making factory known as the ribosomes, we have to bring a copy because the originals can't leave. So what happens is DNA is transcribed into mRNA, which can then leave the nucleus and go to the cytoplasm where the ribosomes are. So think of mRNA like tracing paper that you use to copy the instructions from DNA so the ribosomes have some instructions. mRNA vaccines, such as the ones made from Moderna and Pfizer, don't enter the nucleus of the cell, and they do not affect or interact with the person's DNA. The mRNA from the vaccine causes the cell to make a spike protein, which the body then makes antibodies to. Vaccinated people develop an immune response to the spike protein, and when exposed to the COVID-19 virus, they are protected from infection. The vaccine does not contain a live virus and does not carry a risk of causing COVID-19. The virus itself can't be made from this one piece of mRNA because this RNA just codes for one surface protein. After the protein is made, the mRNA is eventually broken down and cleared by the human body. Something to note is there are many other types of vaccines. Most vaccines are attenuated vaccines, which is when a virus is weakened and then introduced into the body. This small dose of a weak vaccine is easily defeated by the body, and people remain immune for years after. Weakened virus vaccines from AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson are in their stage 3 trials and are on the way, but they're not approved yet to be used. Now let's talk a little bit about the Pfizer vaccine. Please note we are not sponsored by any vaccine making or distributing company, and the following data is from the clinical trials with the articles linked below. So the Pfizer vaccine is a placebo-controlled observational trial. Placebo-controlled means that they had one control group to compare to the experimental group. So the results were not due to chance alone. Observational in this context means the results were collected over time and the subjects weren't intentionally exposed to COVID. Basically, what happened is after you got the shot, you were expected to record your symptoms for 14 weeks after administration of the first dose. This trial had over 43,000 participants, all of whom were 16 years or older and either healthy or had stable chronic medical conditions. Half of the patients who received the mRNA vaccine and half received a placebo, but they didn't know which one they were, so this makes it a blind study. Based on 170 cases of COVID-19, where 162 cases came from the placebo group who got nothing, and 8 cases came from the vaccine group. 10 cases of severe COVID-19 were seen. 9 of those came from the placebo group versus 1 in the vaccine group. Therefore, it was determined that the vaccine was 95% effective at preventing COVID-19, and this number was consistent across age, gender, race, and ethnicity. We'll go into more details about side effects between the clinical trials, but in brief, no serious safety concerns were observed during clinical trials, and most adverse events were mild to moderate and resolved in 1 to 2 days. The most common adverse reactions were fatigue in 3.8% of the people who got the vaccine, and headache in 2%. Pain at the injection site is common and can be more prominent after the second dose. Adverse effects were more commonly reported after the second dose and more prevalent in younger participants. Older adults, which they defined as age greater than 55, had fewer and milder adverse events than those 16 to 55. Bell's palsy was also reported by 4 vaccine recipients and none of the placebo recipients. But it should not be concluded that the vaccine increases your risk for Bell's palsy, as this is the rate at which Bell's palsy occurs in the general population. So this does not mean that the vaccine caused Bell's palsy. Lastly, the FDA authorized emergency use authorization on December 11, 2020 for the Pfizer vaccine. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Moderna vaccine that was developed. So the Moderna vaccine trial was a randomized, stratified, observer-blinded, placebo-controlled trial. This means that volunteers were randomly assigned to groups, and the people collecting data and administering the vaccines didn't know who was in each group. Similar to the Pfizer trial, we have both a control and a placebo group. However, the difference with this trial is that the 2 groups were stratified. So that's when they try to make the 2 groups the same, even though they're composed of different people. They do this by trying to have an equal number of people with health conditions in each group and similar age distributions. This is important because if you have all the sick older people in one group and healthy young people in another, it might skew the results. So this trial enrolled over 30,000 volunteers who were randomly assigned to either getting the vaccine or the placebo. Participants were 18 to 65 years old and could not have had a history of COVID-19 infection, be at high risk for COVID, or be in a location or circumstance that puts them at a high risk of getting COVID. Based on the 196 cases of COVID-19 seen in this trial, 185 cases were in the placebo group and 11 cases occurred in the vaccine group. This gave an efficacy of 94.1% for this vaccine. Something else to note is that 30 severe cases of COVID-19 were seen in this trial, and all of them were in the placebo group. Efficacy was consistent across age, race, ethnicity, and gender groups. The frequency of side effects occurring 28 days after the first injection was comparable among both the group that got the vaccine and the group that did not. The most common side effects were tiredness, which was about 9.7% of people, joint pain, which was about 5.2% of people, injection site pain, which was 4.1% of people, body aches in 8.9% of people, headaches in 4.5% of people, and injection site redness in 2% of people. Unlike the Pfizer trial, the distribution of adverse events did not vary with age, and emergency use authorization for this vaccine occurred on December 18, 2020. Now, let's get to the stuff that you guys are probably very curious about. Should you get the vaccine? So let's first talk about this graph over here. As you can see, immunocompromised persons, such as those with HIV or those taking medications to suppress their immune system, can still get the mRNA vaccine unless otherwise contraindicated. However, it should be noted that immunocompromised individuals were excluded from the Moderna and Pfizer trial. Therefore, the data cannot be really applied too well to that population. So this is a very personal decision, and you should talk to your doctor about what is right for you. People with a history of COVID-19 infection should be offered the mRNA vaccine because clinical trials suggest it is safe. Though, as mentioned, the Moderna trial did exclude patients with past clinical or serological diagnosis of COVID. The Pfizer Stage 3 trial did include participants with history of COVID-19, though. According to the CDC, vaccination is recommended for people with a history of COVID-19 infection, since the immunity is temporary and reinfection can also occur. Also, vaccination in people with current COVID-19 infection should be deferred until recovery from acute illness. Something else to mention is that there is no data on the safety of COVID-19 vaccines in pregnant or breastfeeding women, as these women were excluded from both clinical trials. But COVID-19 vaccines are recommended for this population because if pregnant patients get COVID-19, there is an increased risk of severe illness and there may be an increased risk of adverse pregnancy outcomes, such as preterm birth. There is no data on the safety of COVID-19 vaccines in lactating women or the effects of mRNA vaccines on the breastfed infant or milk production/excretion. Again, this is an extremely personal decision that you should have with a trusted medical professional to understand your personal health risks. Now, let's take a look at the contraindications to vaccination. So these are the people that should not get vaccinated. Do not get vaccinated if you have a severe allergic reaction to a previous dose of mRNA COVID-19 vaccine, if you had an immediate allergic reaction of any severity to a previous dose of the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine or its components, or if you have an immediate allergic reaction of any severity to polysorbate. So in these people, you want to talk to an allergist before getting the vaccine. Now let's talk a little bit about allergic reactions. So as of December, there were 13 cases of anaphylaxis to the mRNA vaccine out of 300,000 people who got the vaccine. So the COVID vaccine is about 10 times higher than all the other vaccines in terms of risk of causing anaphylaxis. But it's also way less than the risk of a penicillin allergy or allergy to radiocontrast dyes or early introduction of peanuts into the diet of children. So just because the risk of developing anaphylaxis is higher with the COVID vaccine compared to the regular vaccine does not mean that it's not safe. If you have any concerns about getting the COVID-19 vaccine due to allergies, please speak with an allergist/immunologist to discuss whether it's safe to get vaccinated. Take precaution if you have ever had an immediate allergic reaction to any other vaccine or injectable therapy, but this is not a strict contraindication, so this does not mean that you can't get the vaccine. Something else to note is that vaccine ingredients can contain latex, eggs, thimerosal, and neomycin, which can cause allergic reactions, but these are not present in the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines. Therefore, having an allergy to other vaccines does not mean you will necessarily have a bad reaction to this one. But the one common ingredient in both vaccines known to potentially trigger allergic reactions is polyethylene glycol. It's important to note that this substance is used very commonly and it's in a bunch of different medications. So there are a lot of medications that contain polyethylene glycol or polysorbate. If you have ever had an immediate allergic reaction of any severity to polysorbate, you should not get the COVID-19 vaccine. While we have learned so much about the novel coronavirus in a short period of time, there is still much we don't know. So we don't know the duration of immune protection, the role of asymptomatic viral shedding if you're infected after vaccination, the need for booster vaccines, specific vaccine efficacy for different populations such as pregnant, immunosuppressed, or people younger than 16 years old. Only time will be able to give us those answers, so make sure to subscribe and don't miss any future updates.